What's good, homies? Welcome back to the Drafts and Drafts podcast. I'm Joe, aka Sultan, and welcome back to the Drafts and Drafts podcast. It's been about 8 months since we last recorded. It is Tuesday, December 2nd. We just got our first snowfall of this winter, and yeah, it's been way too long since our last update. We have so much to go through, but probably too much to just go through everything in one podcast. So today I figured before we get into the, efficiency stuff that I'm good for, before we get Dave back on the pod, before we start doing all the episodes again, let's get into something lighter like a mailbag. Maybe I'll go through, talk a little bit about, how I feel about the 2025 NFL season so far. And yeah, mailbag will be a good way for you guys to get to know, some of my league mates, friends, whoever I'm playing Dynasty with, get an idea for, how everybody else is thinking right now. And then, as we go out through the off season, we'll start talking about some more fantasy stuff if we get back into it. But before we get into it, let's have a draft review. This beer I have here is the Dragon's Milk Crimson Keep Bourbon Barrel Aged Red Ale. And I chose this beer because it aptly represents the Worcester Wyverns, my pride and joy, my 12-1 Juggernaut Dynasty team, which is back-to-back champ, going for the back-to-back-to-back championship, otherwise known as the champ, as Jason Moore from the Footballers would call it. That league is super competitive. Right now, there's technically 3 open spots. But because we do 3 divisions, division winners get 3 at-large bids for the 1, 2, and 3 seeds. And then the remaining 3 teams, the wildcard teams, are just the 3 best teams by record left in the league. And because the West Division is so weak, one of those teams is going to make the playoffs. One of those teams, Dave's team, actually, could potentially make the playoffs and kick 2 teams that are quote unquote better by points scored out of the playoffs. If that happens, there's so much chaos going on. We had the Smithfield Shiny Shuckles, who are in their amidst the third year of their rebuild, on a 40-game losing streak, snapped their losing streak against the big bad Anolis, or the Kongs of the league, who've been to 4 straight championships in our league, winning 2 of them 2 years ago, or 3 and 4 years ago. And that win alone opened up the door for Dave's Bentonville Board Apes to have the comeback of the century. Dave's torn his team down. He's in the process of a rebuild. And what he's going to do is, if he can possibly upset the Kongs or the Anolis next week, he has a chance to sneak into playoffs and then therefore kick out 2 of the other 7-7 teams. But anyways, on to the draft review. Opening up the Crimson Keep Dragon's Milk beer. It looks disgusting. Bottoms up. It's not good. It's not bad. I guess it's like not quite as heavy as I thought it would be. I'll give it a 1.5 out of 5. I'm just not a red ale type guy. Anyways, moving on to the draft review. I'm sorry, moving on to the OTQ. There's there's 1,000 tough questions right now. And this mailbag is going to be a series of tough questions from some of my friends. So I'll try to keep it short, but what's the biggest fantasy and NFL storyline thus far? And I would say, number 1, Drake May is him. Dave, sorry, Bo Nix is great, but Drake May is the truth, the future. Everybody who said, hey, we should draft Marvin Harrison and go sign, fuck it, I don't know, whatever washed quarterback was available on the market 2 years ago, Marcus Mariota, to be our QB1, can go pound sand. And yeah, Drake May is him. But I'd say the storyline of both the fantasy season and the NFL season is that injuries, I don't know, it looks like the fantasy gods said in 2024, double it and give it to the next season. Because 2024 was the story was all of your aging, older, usually injury risk running backs that were 30-ish plus years old, like Kamara, Connor, Pollard, Henry, you name it. Every player stayed healthy predominantly throughout the course of the entire 2024 season. And this year, we're seeing quite possibly, from what I can remember, the most injury riddled season I can remember, with the likes of Neighbors and Bucky and Garrett Wilson and Kyler and Jaden Daniels and James Conner and Najee Harris and Drake London and Tucker Kraft, and the list goes on of players who've gotten hurt and are out for the season. J.K. Dobbins, you know, Terry McLaurin it wasn't a midseason injury, but he's been out all year unexpectedly. There's just so many players, Trey Benson, Cam Scattaboo, so much adversity teams have had to overcome this year. So many, Joe Burrow missed a large portion of the season, which kind of crippled some of the Jamar Chase and T. Higgins teams. I just think that teams that are navigating this landscape, kudos to those teams, because this has been a tough year. But and then one other thing I would say is that, this year was my first year doing guillotine leagues, and I would say far and away my new favorite format. I cannot wait to run it back next year. I'm hoping to expand my league, maybe up the ante a little bit, maybe run a couple leagues and have I don't even know, have a double elimination style. If I can get, too many, if I get 36 people, maybe I'll do two leagues. Who knows? But yeah, anyways, on to the mailbag. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. I have so many pages of notes here. I think there's going to be some redundant answers and some themes that carry over from question to question. So when I notice that, I will kind of bypass that and make reference to it as best I can. And before we get into it, just remember, these are just my opinions. Obviously, it's not gospel. Obviously, I don't know if I knew everything, I'd be making millions doing fantasy, and I'm not. And anybody who says there's one way to do any of this is full of shit. I mean, what you really need to do is find out, one, what your risk tolerance is and all of this. How do you have fun playing? And what are you trying to accomplish while you're playing fantasy? Because I will say, for all of this that I say in here, just keep in mind, at the end of the day, if you want to play to root for, go get your guy, to root for your guy because you like, you love, I don't know, Caleb Williams. Go get Caleb Williams. Go get Bears. If you want to, if that's how you want to play, I'm not gonna. There's no right or wrong way to play. I just think there are ways that I think are, I don't know, dominant strategies, and I know I'm looking forward to help answering some questions here. So, first question here is from my friend Dan, aka PME Warrior. For those of you who might have seen him in some of my league breakdowns, or you might be in leagues with him. So let's hope this audio plays through, and I'm going to play his first question now.
Hey, Draft and Draft podcast. So I'm in a rebuild right now, and this upcoming year I have 3 firsts and 3 seconds, and I just don't think I have enough in the tank to really start a rebuild. So I'm considering pushing those picks to the following year, and I'm wondering what you'd be looking, if you were already going to do that, what types of value would you be looking to get in exchange for those picks? Would you shift a mid first to a future mid first in exchange for, a second round pick who's not from the previous year, who's not performing? Would you be looking only for other picks, and what values, or what types of strategies would you use to shift your picks from one year to the next?
Okay, so first of all, if the audio doesn't come through great, I apologize so much. So I am gonna repeat a little bit of the question back, just so people are aware of what the question was, in case this audio doesn't come through good. Dan's question was: I'm middle of a rebuild. I have a few firsts and a few seconds. I don't feel like I have the firepower to compete next year. Should I push my 2026 picks into 2027 in a rebuild? And if I do, what kind of return should I be looking for? First and foremost, I would say your league format matters in that regard, because I think the bigger your league is, if you only have 3 firsts and 3 seconds, your team's bare, and you're like, oh, I don't know if you look around the league, you're like, there's 2 to 6 teams that are just complete right now. Like, I don't see the point. I'd say, it's a start 11 league. Like those, I guess that makes sense. You want to push the year out, and if you can pick up extra capital on top, so you're kind of maintaining your capital base year over year, you're just delaying the reward. and you're willing to do that, I understand the thought process, but especially in the league that I know he's talking about, a start 8, one quarterback, PPR, 1.5 tight end premium. It only takes a couple players hitting for them to hit your lineup and make you a contender right away. So I say, I don't really see the point. And you're just as likely to hit or miss on those picks as other. It's not like, hey, you're drafting somebody in 2026, and if they, oh, that means I'm ready to compete now. Like, no, that player's going to take time to mature. So why not make those picks in 26 anyways, or whatever? Unless you're planning on trading the picks to fill your lineup through trades, then I understand pushing the picks out so you can make those trades a year later if you don't feel ready. But if you're talking about, oh, those, I don't want to make those picks in 26 because they're not going to be I'm not going to be ready to contend. Chances are, even if you were ready to contend, those 26 players aren't going to help you. Like looking around leagues right now, I don't think there's very many teams that are mature leagues who drafted guys like Judkins, Henderson, Genty, Ekbuka, Hunter, Tet McMillan, Cam Ward, Caleb Johnson, RJ Harvey. Not many of them can attribute their production this year or their contending or their wins and losses to the production of those players. I guess like Buka in the beginning of the season a few times, but like if you were a serious contender, those guys weren't hitting your lineups right away anyways. They shouldn't have been. But anyways, back to your question. Normally I would say yes. The time value of picks says earlier picks should be worth more than later picks because you get the production earlier. You don't have to wait for the player to develop, and there's just as much of a chance that you whiff on 26 than you do in 27. But it's important to just pay attention to the cycles of picks because this class in particular is flipping that logic. The 2027 class, especially in Superflex, already profiles to be absolutely phenomenal because not only are there none of the high profile 2026 quarterbacks have come out. Like we had the idea that potentially Arch Manning, I think DJ Lagway or Lenora Sellers were also 2026 QBs. They're all going back to school. Guys who were billed in the preseason as being potential hits like Drew Aller and Carson Beck and the guy from Clemson, I forget his name, Cade Klubnik. None of them have had good seasons. I know Aller got hurt, but he looked awful last year and I guess not that good this year. There's no blue chip prospects in this class. This guy named CJ Friel does a really good job outlining underclasses, and he pointed out last year how weak the 2026 class looks from an early breakout age standpoint. Of course, there's going to be late risers. Malik Neighbors was not a high profile prospect going into his junior year. Ashton Genty was not regarded as a generational prospect at any point in the process until his junior year. Of course, he was a good prospect, but definitely was not generational. Brian Thomas came out of, I would say, relatively out of nowhere, but granted, he was on a team behind, Keyshawn Booty, who was a stud at the time, was playing with Malik Neighbors. I'm pretty sure Jamar Chase would have been, I mean, I went too soon. But anyways, players like Jane Daniels came out of nowhere. Players are going to come out of nowhere for the 2026 class, but as of right now, there are no true blue chip prospects in this class outside of Jeremiah Love. I know there's a really good set of crop of wide receivers at the top that are probably going to go in the first round, but that happens every year. It doesn't mean that just because the 109 drafted wide receiver in this class is definitely not going to be as good as the 109 drafted receiver in the 2024 class. 2024 class was a generational class. We had Caleb, Drake May, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, all of which were blue chip generational prospects we knew about 2 years prior to them declaring for the draft, on top of guys like Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, I can't remember anybody else off the top of my head, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, who kind of just emerged throughout the process, Lad McConkey, and became these stud prospects in that class. And 2027 just looks loaded across. Obviously, if you haven't heard of Jeremiah Smith yet, you're probably not a very good dynasty player. Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman, the running back there from Georgia, Nate Frazier, I think is supposed to be really good. Like all of the QBs are moving to 2027. So especially in 2027, I would definitely try to be moving my 26s into 2027. Granted, that depends. I heard Heath Cummings mentioned this on the CBS podcast. If I have an early 26, I'm not flipping that for a random 27 or even a projected early 27. The only picks I would try to move into 2027 would be my late picks. And then one quarterback, same thing. I guess if I had any pick from 107 to 112, of course, I think I would, especially if I don't love anybody or haven't done any research, I'm happy to move my 20 late 26 for a random 27 or even a projected late 27 in the off chance that team suffers the kind of injuries that this year has afforded people. You have a chance that it could become an earlier pick. So the problem is you're not going to find many managers willing to add to their 27 pick just to move them to 2026 because I think any manager that's well researched is probably going to feel like 27 is a little better than 26 or on par with, has a chance of being better and probably doesn't want to add to it. And any manager who doesn't know that already probably doesn't like the idea of paying a premium on top of their pick to move into 2026 because that's only something that you do if you're very convicted in the class, and those types of managers already would understand about 2027. But again, getting back to the concept, I would say I don't think there's any point in trying to pushing this rebuild out any further. You've rebuilt for 3 straight seasons. You don't need the perfect roster. You don't need nine players to hit to become to win the league or make playoffs or give yourself a chance at winning, because rebuilds resolve so much faster in a start 8 league, especially a one quarterback. You only need to hit on a few guys. Some of those can be guys you get in late rounds that you marry up with your early picks. Like if you pick up a Puka Nakua, you draft a guy like Bucky Irving, you draft a guy like Cam Scattaboo, all of whom were not first round picks. Shout out the Merman and shout out Brian Bohm because he's the one who has all 3 of those guys on his dynasty team. Those are the types of guys that you can supplement with a few first round picks like an Omari Hampton or like a Malik Neighbors and immediately you become a contender. So I would say for you and Dan, even if you don't hit on a Malik Neighbors type, I would still, unless you can get a deal like you mentioned, you get a second on top of a 27 first. I don't see the point in trading out of your picks at this point. How long should a rebuild actually last? This is one of the strongest points I'm going to try to make repeatedly through this is that a true rebuild, 1.5 to 2.5 years max. There should be the decision point to your rebuild, which is usually mid-season of a team that's finally kicked the can, or in the preseason, where you start to tear it. The tear down process should take about a year. Asset accumulation process should take another year, and then boom, you're now should be back into a competitive window because you don't need that many assets in a start 8 to be a contender. Any rebuild that's longer than 2.5 years, I'm sorry, it's a process failure. You fall into this trap of you're chasing this perfect team, or you're constantly trying to extract value instead of just letting your players marinate, and you're wasting these small competitive windows in a game that's so predicated on getting lucky. Like half the teams in the preseason that think they're competitive run into injuries to either their players quarterbacks. They run into random concussions, or a player get healthy scratches where you lose a matchup with 1-0 in your lineup. But yeah, anyways, back to the original point about what type of return should you look for if you do move picks. I would say normally the time value of picks says you should demand a premium on future picks to move up into the current year. I personally won't be adding anything to 27 picks to get to 2026 unless it's for a specific player. Now, when it comes to 2028, I will happily add to my 2028 first to get into 2026. If the certain players that I evaluate when it comes to it, or my trusted analysts that I follow evaluate the class and think that there's a certain player that's slipping in the draft, I'll happily trade my 28 first to move up to 2020, the 1.09 to take a guy I like. Although in most of my situations, I feel like I've done a good job building out my teams to the point where the first is more valuable to my team on my roster, not like keeping my own first, not because I'm worried about missing it, because I have a fairly complete lineups, and the fungibility or tradability of a first to go fill gaps in my team when those arise, if I do suffer injuries, is more valuable to me than going to take a shot on a rookie and ending up with Matthew Golden, who you probably can't even sell for a second right now. I'm sure you could, but it doesn't seem like you can. Anyways, that was way too long-winded, so I'm going to try to wrap through these as fast as I can. I'm going to go to Dan. So he sent in 2 questions, so thank you so much, Dan.
Hey, Drafts and Drafts. I'm a huge fan, potentially your number one fan. Number one, two questions. Number one, we need a fan leaderboard. I guess that's not
Okay.
really a question, but a demand. And then number two, so I'm in a few different leagues, and a good friend of mine is also in each of my leagues, and he just kicks everyone's ass in fantasy football. And so I guess my main question is like, should I just continue to go for second or third place in all of my leagues and just embrace the fact that like my friend is better at fantasy football? Or like, do I need to make it my mission in life to beat him? I just don't I don't know I don't know where to go from here because he's just so dominant. Um yeah, I guess I'm just, but I'm puzzled at what to even do. It's and just for some reference, it's four different leagues, three of them being dynasty. He is basically the number one team in every single league, um, and no end in sight for his dynasties. And then yeah, we've been in these leagues for like a variety of years for each one. Say 6 years, 5 years, and 2 years, something like that. All right, thanks.
First of all, Dan, thanks for the second question. We'll definitely work on the fan leader board. Going to get my intern on it as soon as possible. Um, for those of you, if you couldn't hear it, the main question was he's in a league where one manager, one of his friends, is in all of his leagues and he kicks everyone's ass. He's like the best team in all the leagues. His dynasties have no end in sight. Um, should he just concede the fact that he's going to be playing for second every year, or should he be making aggressive moves to try to usurp him and go for first, or should he quit? I'd say one, first of all, your friend isn't better than you. He probably just has way more time. He's probably a little bit autistic. Sorry, I'm gonna get fucking canceled for that. Um, Second, I'd say if the only way that you draw success or fun or entertainment from fantasy is by winning, you're probably playing for the wrong reasons. Like, of course, the end goal is that you want to win. But for me, the best part about fantasy is one, I get to talk to all my friends all the time that I probably otherwise would talk to less frequently because of the distance, the time constraints, just the things that we have all in common all at the same time is a lot. There are a lot fewer things in common than there used to be. Just some of us play video games, some of us watch certain shows, we work different jobs, we have some of us have families, some of us don't. um, and then I'd say, you know, there's too much randomness to concede anything, especially again in a shallow format league like a start eight where there's so much randomness. All you need to do is make playoffs and anything can happen. Amari Cooper can drop a 50-point game in the first round of playoffs. Najee Harris can drop. I mean, Le'Veon Bell could drop a 55-point game on the 6 seed, and that's boom. There you cannot overcome a 55-point game in a start eight. In a start 10 or 11, yeah, the best team probably wins all the time because there's just if they're that good of a team, they can withstand randomness like a random zero or random dud. But in a start eight, like you lose one player to a concussion, one player to a an ejection, and one player has a dud, you're done. It doesn't matter how many good games you have the rest of the way. That's like 38% of your production out the window. Um, Anyways, let's move on to the next question. Next question is from Dylan, one of my good friends. So, actually, my best friend. So, let's see what he has to say.
First time, long time. This is your old Sycamore Salamensis phoning in for a dynasty question. So, first time doing dynasty this year, and I'm starting to learn values of picks, future picks, unknown versus known talent. So, my question is going to be in the same vein of worthwhile future draft picks. So my question would be, if I'm picking late in the first round, what's the actual value difference between that or trading back to get multiple second round picks? I feel like having the more second round picks gives you more attempts at finding a player versus just that one first round pick, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that would be my question in regards to how valuable is a first round pick actually, unless you're picking like in the first couple picks.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Salamances. Thanks, Dylan. I appreciate the question. And honestly, it's a tough concept, not just for new dynasty players, but I feel like it's an evolving question all the time, especially because we're so recency biased that it just takes a couple bad classes in a row for people to say, yo, fuck these picks. Like, I don't want to get Traylon Burks or Sky Moore or Damian Pierce with my late first when I could have traded them for Devontae Smith, or I could have traded them for Tony Pollard even in his prime. Like I would be much rather. I don't want to get Anthony Richardson or Michael Mayer. It's like it takes just a few classes like that in a row, and then all of a sudden the pendulum swings. And I think the cliche answer is going to be it depends. It depends on class strength, your league format, and how you value production or your patience level, your team construct. All these things matter. And the goal here is going to be trying to do that 3D, 4D chess calculus that you need to do to say, when does it make more sense for me to take multiple shots and when doesn't it? And I would say, like, without even going through my notes, if I'm taking shots on running backs, I would rather have 4 shots in the second than 1 shot in the late first, because running back is such a fickle position where not obviously skill and talent matters, but opportunity matters so much more for running back. So if I could just get a crack at getting RJ Harvey, if I could get either RJ Harvey or I could draft Caleb Johnson, Cam Scatabo, and RJ and Bajal Tootin from this year's class, that's basically a late first for 3 seconds. I feel like you should take the seconds, because now you would have came out of that draft with Scatabo, who's probably the best of the bunch, on top of 2 other really strong dart throws. Whereas if you were talking about trading, if you were thinking of taking Ikbuka with your late first, and then you could have picked up Jaden Higgins, I think Trey Harris and Luther Burden, you'd probably be kicking yourself, because wide receiver is such a skill dominant position where, like, if you really truly believe that late first round receiver is a stud or a really good player and you're unsure on the receivers, there is no volume. There's no injury that gets Trey Harris more targets. Like, if Trey Harris goes out there, runs his route, and cannot get open, Justin Herbert is not throwing him the ball. The only time that ever happens where a player gets a target they don't deserve is a guy like Rondale Moore, or even, I guess, Luther Burden right now, or like players who get solely designed plays where it's like they're basically long extended handoffs. So it also depends on the nature of the class and what you're going for. It what boils down for me is, if the late first falls into a similar tier as your seconds, the way you evaluate the class, then trading down from your first for seconds is absolutely the right play and a good play. But if you see a discernible tier break at the 110, then you shouldn't be trading the 109 for the 202, 205 in a future second. Because if you say, like, I'm using 24 as an example, the 19, 110 a couple years ago was a combination of Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy, Jonathan Brooks, Brian Thomas Jr., Bo Nix. Like, there, and as you can see right there, there's 3 of those players are studs and 2 of those players are whiffs. So, like, that's where I would have said, I'm going to stay and I'm going to pick hopefully pick Brian Thomas or Ladd McConkey, then trade down into the second and pick up Keon Coleman, I don't know, Xavier Legette and Ricky Pearsall, because those were totally a negative EV play. When it comes to, like, the first point I made by format, in Superflex, late first hold considerably more value, because the QB scarcity that Superflex creates pushes elite and highly drafted QBs further up into the first round. Typically, you'll see anywhere from 1 to 3 quarterbacks going in the first 7 to 8 picks, because usually those teams are at the bottom because they don't have a quarterback or don't have 2 good quarterbacks. So that pushes your better performing wide running backs and wide receivers down the board. In one quarterback, those formats tend to be shallower, and because QB is valued further, so much less, they tend not to go in the first round, making late firsts so much less valuable than early firsts. They're still valuable and probably obviously more valuable and have a better hit rate in seconds based on all the data, but the best players tend to be gone by the middle of the first. And I would say a rule of thumb on hit rates, at least how I try to imagine it, is like an early first has like an 80, 90% hit rate. Like your 101, 102, 103 tend not to miss. Like you're looking at guys like from the past is like Bijan, Gibbs, JSN. You had I guess from quarterbacks, you would have had Stroud in there and Bryce Young. Like a couple years last year, you had in one QB, you would have had Marv, Neighbors, and Adunze. In Superflex, you would have had Daniels and Caleb in there as well. Like years before that, you would have had like Jamar Chase, Kyle Pitts, Najee Harris, Drake London, Brees Hall, Kenneth Walker. Like your early firsts are, if they miss, like the only misses I can think of is like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like then mid first, I'd say like 104 to 107 is where you start to get like a 50-60% hit rate. Like you got like Chris Olave in there, but you got, Garrett Wilson, you've got James Cook, but then you have like a Damian Pierce or, a Sky Moore might sneak up in there. You'll have Brock Bowers and Brian Thomas, but you'll have a Xavier Worthy sneak in there. So like you start to see some of the hit rates decline. You got Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston and, Devon Achan, and actually he was kind of later, but you catch where I'm going. And then late first, I'd say tend to be a 25-ish%, 25 to 50% hit rate. And seconds, just general seconds, tend to be like a 10 to 25% hit rate. So, if you're moving down from the 110 to the 202, you probably should demand a future second and a third. But if you're moving down from the 1010 to like the 205, like a full 7, 6, 7 pick, a half a round decline, I would probably want another second. I mean, 2 more seconds on top of that. So like that's what the kind of value I'd be demanding. But the main point I'm trying to make is late firsts are only special if they belong to a small, meaningful tier, like we kind of highlighted with the 2024 class. If not, they're just slightly more expensive seconds. So I think the onus falls on you to kind of decide when to do that. I know it's kind of a long, roundabout way of saying there's no right answer to it. But at the end of the day, I'd say make your own tiers, compare them to what ADP is doing, compare them to what some experts are saying. But you should have your own feeling for the class and kind of make your decisions on that. All right, moving on to the next question. Next question is from my friend Cam, who's first time we're playing a league together, and so far he's been one of the better managers. So I'm excited to have play with him for the rest of my life.
So my question involves 2 quarterbacks that have taken major value hits this year. Both have kind of gone through injuries and maybe even soft benched at times. And I think you get the feeling with both of them, if they string together a few starts, whenever those starts may come up, that their value could increase. One is veteran Kyler Murray, and another is a first-year starter in J.J. McCarthy. So if you're maybe looking for a QB3 or have either one of them as a QB3, are you buying them at their current price, which is probably like an early, mid, even a late second? Or if you got them, are you just holding on to them, or are they kind of get this guy off my team yesterday type of guys?
Awesome. So Cam, great question. Like honestly, a question I was not expecting. And for those of you who couldn't hear it, if it was too soft, is how do you handle QBs that have, this specifically this year's QBs, but in general, QBs that have taken huge value hits, by virtue of soft benchings or poor performance or injury or all of the above, or, are you looking, if you're looking for a QB3 and have them, are you selling them to get your QB3, or are you trying to buy them to be your QB3? Are you buying for early seconds, or are you getting them off your team as soon as possible? So I'd say, my first thought is it depends. It's going to be the answer for a lot of this. And I think QBs are so hard to value. And I think they're the best dynasty buys for rebuilders because there's always upside there, even after a value hit. Because as soon as they get opportunity, they have value. They all have value until they don't. Same, you could have said that, years ago, Justin Fields went from first round startup pick to worthless to worth a second to worthless to worth a first to worthless. And it's just like this musical chairs of like, how do you time the market on Justin Fields appropriately? Same with like Anthony Richardson was like the 102 in Superflex rookie drafts to being a startup first round pick after having 2.5 good games his rookie year. He was still a first round pick. And then in the preseason, you still had an opportunity to sell Anthony Richardson for a second to people who were like, well, if he wins the starting job in Indianapolis over Daniel Jones, he could be a league winner, because it's always a possibility that you're holding this lottery ticket. My main point is these soft benching QBs, or these QBs that have taken hits, are super volatile, and the market can swing dramatically in either direction. And as a rebuilder, you need to be taking volatile, like calculated, volatile chances on players, especially if you're a down bad rebuilder. Then you need to be taking chances on these players because your only hope is that you hit on the next Brock Purdy, you hit on the next, I don't know, can't think of a second round drafted QB who's now a stud. Jalen Hurts. You hit on Jalen Hurts and you are turning your franchise around either in the form of having a franchise QB for the next 5 years and or your opportunity to sell him for multiple picks and or a productive player that you think may be more of an anchor. If you thought Hurts was going to be the next Fields, you could have sold Hurts at any point in time for a guy like Jared Goff in a first and a second. So hitting on those guys when you're a rebuilder, you should be always pursuing quarterbacks, even though you end up holding the bags for guys like Will Levis, who becomes a zero, or Zach Wilson, who becomes a zero, or Trey Lance. Like, if you bought it in Trey Lance for a second, you're now looking at him going, what a waste of a pick, but it's still worth it. There's just been so many examples of bounce backs. I just feel like you look around and you say sometimes the player just needs a change of scenery, a new head coach, a new opportunity, a new team. Like, look at Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold. I don't know, you name it. They could have been picked up off waivers at times, and they're now worth first in Superflex or, whatever, some sort of combination of that value. And these guys are never fully dead. Even look at, especially like mediocre QBs who've run an offense before. Like, I think a guy like Kyler, not JJ McCarthy, is going to have a job somewhere, and he probably gets more leash than Justin Fields did because at least he's been a good quarterback in some degree, for some degree, at the NFL level. But look at like this year alone: Jacoby Brissett, Joe Flacco, Tyrod Taylor, Kirk Cousins. They all have fetched thirds at some point this year simply because they're a starting quarterback in a team who lost the starter on that team or their own starting quarterback, Marcus Mariota. Like, they need a spot start. I sold Flacco 2 weeks ago, and the other manager knew it was his last start, knew Joe Burrow was coming back on Thanksgiving, but he had lost Kyler and then lost Rodgers to that hand injury. And I sold him on that day. I told him I'll take any fourth or I'll take any of these guys off his bench. And like one of them was Devin Neal. He sent me Devin Neal for Joe Flacco straight up. And now I'm in a situation where Devin Neal might be my lineup if Alvin Kamara is out for the year. So I just turned a QB off waivers into potentially being worth, I guess, a second round pick or maybe a pair of thirds. Like, maybe I'll try to sell them. I don't know. But situations are not black and white. It's all about timing and opportunity. So how I would go about acquiring these QBs, if I'm down bad and I'm rebuilding, I'm trying to work them into some sort of bigger deal where I'm tearing off one of my big assets that's so big where that player's value is so minuscule that adding them to the deal becomes essentially a throw-in. So the first example I can think of is if you're sitting on a guy like, Josh Allen or Lamar's, Joe Burrow, or who's Patrick Mahomes, and you're like, man, I had a good run. I'm down bad. I'm going to fully rebuild. You go to somebody who's a contender and you try to sell them Mahomes and you're like, yeah, the price is 3 firsts, but instead of a first, I'll happily take your Garrett Wilson, or I'll happily take your, Malik Neighbors straight up. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to be stuck with that quarterback. Why don't you throw in, Kyler, or why don't you throw in JJ McCarthy? Because, 9, that came out kind of like Nazi Germany. I meant to say 9 and just kind of I'm sorry about that. Anyways, my goal will be trying to lump that guy into it, because if you outright go pursue JJ McCarthy or Kyler, my feeling, at least in my experience, is that managers get defensive when you try to buy low on their assets, because they look at it as like, oh, I spent the 102 on this guy. What makes you fucking think I would ever consider selling him for a second? And then it also telegraphs what your intent is, which is to get that player, which already, that in and of itself increases the value of that player. Unless it's like an obvious situation where you're talking to a guy who was a contender, lost Kyler. He's like, hey, listen, dude, you need a quarterback. I'm rebuilding. Kyler's value is depressed. Like, let me buy him off you. I need the lottery ticket. You need the, Jordan Love. I'll give you Jordan Love for Kyler, a first, and Tank Dell. And they're like, fuck, I don't want to do that. You're like, dude, do you want a quarterback or not? Like, I know I'm buying Kyler Love. Kyler's the only one I can think of, but there's plenty of quarterback quarterbacks in that boat right now. But yeah, working them into deals like selling Baker, Dak, or Goff as a rebuilder to a contender. Although it doesn't make sense right now. No rebuilder still has Baker, Dak, or Goff on their team. The big reality behind these quarterbacks is that for a rebuilder, they have asymmetrical upside. Said different, they're not scoring points for your team until they are, which means they're not valuable until they are. Your max points for stays low, which is great for securing your premium draft position. And then the moment a QB gets a starting job, even temporarily, their value spikes and now contenders suddenly care. So this is why all of these soft benching assets we've talked about, they're not dead assets, they're dormant assets, and they're waiting to explode. So let's move on to the next question. Next question is from Bohm, aforementioned Brian Bohm, the manager of the Chelsea Mermen team, that the original rebuilder of the PDFDL, who is now actually they were the second favorite team. I had them as the biggest threat to overthrowing the regime in the PDFD, and they've just been hampered with injuries. But yeah, let's see what this question is.
Hey, Drafts and Drafts crew. We've got the Mermen and Wormies here. Question is this: for a team that is kind of aging out, window is either definitely closed or is closing, and not a lot of assets in future picks. What are your top one or two off-season strategies to help right the ship and get yourself in a position to speed up a rebuild? Thanks, guys. Looking forward to the next review.
Sorry about that. Anyways, good question, Bohm. For those who couldn't hear, Bohm just said, for a team whose competitive window is closing, they're aging out, they don't have very many picks, what's your top 1 to 2 off-season strategies to help right the ship and speed up a rebuild? So again, the big theme about this is be talking about rebuilding versus, contending and reloading. I say, before I make any decisions, survey the landscape of the league. If there are already teams who have started tanking and we're mid-season, I may be too late to the party, and it may be too late to buy rebuilding assets. Players like, Malik Neighbors and Bucky Irving and Garrett Wilson and Jaden Reed and Tucker Kraft may have already been swooped up and purchased by other rebuilders. So you really can't start buying those. They may already have a concentration of picks, and you even offering them a T. Higgins for a first, they're probably going to say, no, I'd rather just take my chance on the first, or I'll just wait till the offseason. And then if I want to buy T. Higgins, I will, but I don't have any need for T. Higgins now. So there's likely only if that's the case, there's only 2 or 3 other teams I need to beat out to make playoffs. And I'll take a 15% chance at winning a title in the playoffs by sneaking in than a 100% chance of not making it by just intentionally throwing my season to rebuild for a year. So that's that. If you do decide to rebuild, the first thing I'd want to know is if you do have your own pick. If so, it's so much easier to justify pivoting towards a rebuild because you can control your own pick value. You can move aging assets for future assets because it improves your own pick and accelerates your rebuild, especially if you're using least max points for to decide pick order. And you can justify taking on more volatility because your pick benefits from volatility. If you do not have your own pick, I'd suggest doing everything you can to get your own pick back before you start your rebuild. The moment you start selling off your own assets before you get your own pick, you lose your leverage in getting your own pick back. Now, obviously, when you go to the manager who owns your pick and you ask him about it, he's going to then obviously assign a premium to getting your own pick back. It's no longer a first. If you say, hey, can I get my own pick back? And you're like, I'll give you this player. It's just a player for a first. Like, you're being, I don't know, gaslighting, or you're being intentionally stupid in order to try to mislead it. Because getting your own first back is worth far more than just a first, especially because if you can turn it into 101, the 101 I'd argue is worth 3 firsts. And to me, the ability to control your own team is almost worth a first in and of itself. If you can't get it back, to me, because I'm petty and I'm spiteful, you got to try to compete. Do everything in my can to make sure that pick is not the 101, the 102, 103. I'm not going to tank any, throw any matchups or do anything stupid that's going to ruin the league. But I'm going to make margin deals that improve my lineup without destroying long-term value. You only need one injury to a contender's lineup. JSN tweaks his hamstring in the first quarter, knock on wood. Puka Nacua gets a concussion, etc. to steal a win in the playoffs and get yourself to the money, which is if you're a team that's feels like you can't win it all, even just placing in the money to me justifies not pivoting towards the rebuild if you don't own your own first. If all else fails and you want to rebuild, you can't get your own first back, just resign to the fact that you're going to have to rebuild without your own pick and still make moves towards your future. But this is absolutely the last choice for me. At the end of the day, though, I'm not going to ruin my roster construction just because I can't get my own pick back. A theme we've been mentioning, fantasy playoffs are pure randomness. I feel like I've read this somewhere. I've done the math, just like even the most stacked teams every week have a 70% chance at winning, 75 at most, which means if they have a bye and their chances at winning the playoffs at most are still like 40% or whatever the calculation logic says. But now getting into the rebuild and what kind of assets you have, I'd say first thing I'm going to analyze in the offseason is what kind of assets do I actually have? Are they still productive contending pieces like A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, or are they in decline and no longer producing and they're actually tough sells like Mark Andrews, like Calvin Ridley, who's hurt? Amari Cooper last year would have been a good example. Tony Pollard, he's disappeared. Alvin Kamara, he was injured and not productive. That distinction really matters because productive but aging pieces still have market value, especially to a contender, as a cheap stopgap. You can sell Devontae Adams for probably a pair of seconds right now, or maybe just a single second in an underperforming rookie like Trey Harris. But non-productive assets like Alvin Kamara have basically no value. Like you could probably try to sell him for a fourth, but at that point you're like, I might as well just hold him till next year and see if he comes back again and rips off a few 15-point games. Maybe I can sell him for a second. Next, you need to evaluate the market economy in your league. Are there teams who need pieces that you're selling? Too many managers skip this step and try to go sell an old wide receiver to somebody like Bohm, who has 7 receivers, 8 startable receivers already. And it's like, where did you think I would want to buy Jawan Jennings? Like, how does he matter for my team? My team already has Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison and DK Metcalf and Puka. Where does this guy fit? It makes no sense. Or like somebody comes to me and offers me Zach Ertz when I have Trey McBride and Rondé Gadsden. I'm like, where did you think that I wouldn't even pay I wouldn't even pay Fab? Or I guess I would pay Fab, but like, it doesn't mean just because I'm getting a deal, or why would I even pay above market value for somebody? Somebody offered me George Kittle for a first, and I'm like, even if that's a deal, like I'm not putting him in the lineup ahead of McBride, and I'm probably not putting him ahead of my flex over, Drake London. So it doesn't make sense. If you can't identify that there's contenders that need your assets, you're not going to get a deal done. Period. If there are no contenders who can realistically use your assets and you can't force a sell, and it's, again, maybe better off pivoting towards competing. If these pieces are declining and you can't contend, you need to sell aggressively. If you are sitting on Tony Pollard and you're like, I need to sell, you need to find the Ty J. Spears owner and move him for anything you can. I don't care if it's a single third. That feels gross. It doesn't matter. You prioritize flipping these players for underperforming players with past upside. Sell Tony Pollard for Jaden Blue. He hasn't played this year. Oh, why would I fucking do that? Why wouldn't you do it? What do you gain by holding Tony Pollard? Oh, I could hold out for a second. Why? By the time you're competitive, Tony Pollard won't matter and Jaden Blue might. I want to take dart throws on picks and players that may grow in value instead of veterans who absolutely will not. Anyways, moving on to the next question. We're going to go on to Jeff Donis's question, which he didn't send in a voice note. So he just said, hey guys, I'm having a hard time with trying to figure out how to do trades with picks and players. It really confuses me. So that was my impression of Jeff. And I'd say the first thing I'd say is picks plus combining the value of picks plus players is probably the hardest mindset shift to go from redraft to dynasty. Because in redraft, everything's linear. Players are worth what they're producing. So you're either trading current production for future production, like you're trading an injured player or a suspended player for a current player because you're in a pickle and you need to win, or a player on bye for a guy who's not on bye because you need to win, or you're trading for positional needs. You have an excess at wide receiver. You picked up Wan'Dale Robinson. You picked up Quentin Johnson. You trade them for a running back like Kamani Vidal because you need a running back help this week. They need wide receiver, and that's a logical trade. Or you're trading excess to tier up. You spot a guy who lost Tucker Kraft. You draft Trey McBride and Travis Kelce. You picked up Aronde Guess and you picked up Harold Vannon. You offer them Travis Kelce and Tyler Warren for, Brees Hall because you're like, I need help at running back. I'm going to give them where I have excess. In Dynasty, picks represent future optionality, and the value of that shifts depending on what tiers you're in. And the way I personally try to use picks and trades is to move within tiers or move up tiers. And when I say within tiers, it's where I move within perceived tiers where I see some tier differences. Like, for example, last year, I might have said, I think Drake London should be a top 10 receiver. The market says he's a 10 to 15 receiver. And if I own one of those 10 to 15 receivers, like say Garrett Wilson, and I think London's way better, I can offer the London owner Garrett Wilson for London in a second and say, I think London is better than Wilson, but yet they're in the same tier. Or I could say, I'm going to offer Wilson and a second for Drake London and say, I think London is way better than Drake Wilson. They're in the same tier. I need to offer some sort of sweetener to get to London. But if I thought London was a tier above Wilson, I'm still winning that trade. You know what I mean? Like, not every trade has to make sense from the lens of a trade calculator. If you think a certain way, you should be willing to overpay in the eyes of a calculator to get to move across tiers. Player for player trades to me don't work because it's basically saying I like my guy more than your guy. You can't. I don't. Whenever I see a trade go down that's like Ricky Pearsall for T Higgins, I'm like, where? How did that trade was just me saying I like your guy better. Do you want to trade him to me for my guy? And the other guy going sure. Like somebody should be adding something to every trade, in my opinion, unless it's cross positional. But as soon as you get to the realm of real high level assets, picks do not allow you to really tier up. They only allow you to grease the trade to move around tiers. You can't say, if you think London and Amon-Ra St. Brown are in the same tier, you can't just offer London straight up for Amon-Ra St. Brown because there's no incentive, and I think risk aversion takes over. I'd rather die with my Amon-Ra St. Brown than trade him away to you, have London kind of fizzle out and Amon-Ra St. Brown go ham. I'm going to feel like shit after that. To me, if you want to move within a tier, you got to add about a quarter of that player's value. So if you say a player is worth, a single first, if you want to move within that tier, you want to trade T. Higgins for Devontae Smith, you probably got to add a third to T. Higgins. Now, if you want to move, London for Wilson, I feel like that's got to be at a second. Now, if you get up to the very, very big dogs, the biggest, Drake May and Jaden Daniels, you got to have some serious conviction to convince the other manager to take your, if you have Drake May and you're like, I think Jaden Daniels is him. You can't just offer Drake May in a third to get Jaden Daniels. Daniels owner's going to go, this is not enough at all for me to come off of Daniels. Even if Drake May is better, you got to offer a first. And like, that's where it's like, you really have conviction that Daniels is that much better than May. You have to be willing to pay about a quarter of their value. Now, obviously that sounds ridiculous, but like, it wouldn't have been if in the preseason, in reverse, the Jaden Daniels owner was like, I think I'm going to trade Jaden Daniels for Drake May in a first, would have been not enough in the preseason probably. And now it looks like a complete, the opposite direction, free first. Moving up a tier to me requires more of a premium than the gap between two players. Like if you're trying to go from Jaden Reed to Chris Olave, and Jaden Reed's worth a second and Chris Olave is worth a first, you can't just add a second to Jaden Reed to get to Chris Olave. That's 2 seconds is not equal a single first, in my opinion. Kind of what we covered with Dylan's example question earlier was how many seconds equal a first. Is like, you want to move from Reed to Olave, you got to add a first to Reed, which sounds like, wait, why? If Olave is worth like a first, that sounds like an overpay. Like, that's how it works to me. When you're tiering up or if you're tiering down, you should be commanding 2 assets in return. That's kind of how I think about it. Let's move on to the next question from Matt Gilday here.
What's the plan for the next 5 years for the league now that we're well into, 6 or 7 years now? We've got a bit of parity. We've got some lesser interested or active teams. how do we plan for the next few years of keeping people involved and interested and active and I don't know, just generally involved in the league like people were for the first few years. You see a little bit of, I think, a downturn with chats, with, even just small things like chugging for, what is it, whatever it is, the worst team or least efficient team. How do we keep people involved over the next few years, especially when there's, clearly one very, very good team that's set up for the future. Others probably trending that way. How do you keep those owners and teams involved that are maybe on the downswing and we don't see a lot of activity from?
So, Matt, awesome question. Honestly, because I've wondered the same thing. For those of you who couldn't hear it, he said, what's the future of our league now? Talking about PDFD. Gilday is one of the managers in our league. How do we spark life back into our league? We're in year 7 now. It's starting to feel a little stale, less activity in chat, less activity from the beer chugs, less excitement. There's not as much parity as there used to be. How do we infuse some excitement back in the league to get some excitement going? And, I'd say this is kind of par for the course for Dynasty. Again, this is my first Dynasty, so I can't speak from a ton of experience, but I actually did some research on this question alone to say, year 7, first of all, we're in the top 99th percentile of Dynasty leagues in terms of just longevity, especially with only one manager turnover in 7 years. Most dynasties last 2 to 3 years tops before people erupt into anarchy. Someone who's too dumb to get out of their own way ruins the league for everybody else. And we are in elite stability compared to most dynasty leagues. And this is also tends to be where leagues hit this, I don't know, I guess I'm going to call it a stagnation curve, where a few dominant teams emerge at the top, a few bottom teams fall into rebuilds, and these middle teams become unsure of what to do because they see this no path potentially to winning, to beating the top teams, but also don't want to suffer a multi-year rebuild, and even the rebuilding assets are being hoarded by the 2 teams rebuilding. So they're just like, what do I do? I can't go get these elite assets from the top teams because they don't want to part with them. And I don't want to sell my players for nothing for scraps because the elite teams don't want to buy them. The other middle teams don't want to buy them either because they're like, I'm afraid of giving up a first because they're like, well, I'd rather hold my first than, Chris Olave doesn't give me that much of a good chance to win. Jalen Waddle doesn't make me a superstar. And it's like, this dynamic is totally normal. From everything I've saw, it's totally normal. It's not a failure. And it's reaching this, a new second, I don't know, trimester, if you want to call it. It just seems like there needs to be some sort of shakeup involved. And I did a bunch of thinking on some solutions, and I don't think anything really needs to be done in particular to spice it up. But I do think easy for me to say, being the team that feel like I'm reaping the rewards. For those of you who don't know the dynamic, we've year 7, 1 QB, start 8 with defenses, PPR 1.5 tight end premium. We've had basically over the first couple of years we had 3 different winners the first 3 years, and then since then it's been one team went back to back in year 4, and then another team went back to back in years 5 and 6, or 6 and 7, or 5 and 6. Sorry, and now we're looking at again the same 3 to 4 teams making playoffs every year, and then just churning out the bottom 5 and 6 seeds. I guess I'm being a little bit facetious with that, but I guess with any dynasty league, you would expect just year over year, on average, you should have 3 teams should make the same playoffs every 2 years in a row, and 3 teams should miss 2 years in a row. Just math would tell you. So I don't think that's as much of an issue as just the feeling of it being stale. And I did I thought about it a lot, and I did some research, and I'd say a full reset is an option. I think it's the worst possible solution to this type of dilemma. A reset punishes all of the most active, engaged managers and rewards the managers who are apathetic, have poor management, don't know how to value appropriately. Those managers, oh, nobody wants to trade with me. No, maybe you just don't know how to value anything. And it's like, This dissolves trust. Managers who are now like, okay, what's the point of me planning for the future if at the first sight of a good team, we're just going to dissolve the league? Oh, because I spent time to try to build my team the right way, we're going to dissolve the league if someone gets too competitive. I guess I'll do that again. Resetting it creates a toxic structure. Some things I've thought about is what if there was multiple consolation bracket rewards? Maybe just in a short-term rebalancing fix. It was like the winner of the consolation bracket gets an untradeable 113 pick. The runner-up gets an untradeable 207, and the third place gets an untradeable 213. So now teams in the consolation bracket have something else to compete for beyond just the value, the lottery balls for their picks, especially if they trade their own picks away. There's less incentive, less fun, less player things involved. One, it has more reason for you to make trades to try to actually acquire some competitive assets, knowing, hey, if I go trade for a cheap Adonai Mitchell right now, not only could he be a future dynasty asset, but now it's not just like, oh, I don't want to buy him because I'd rather keep the second than spend it on Adonai Mitchell. But what if the second gets you Adonai Mitchell and the 113 if you win the bracket with him? Now that's a different calculus. People should, at least in my head, start planning around how do I buy cheap players that can help me win the consolation bracket. And it keeps the middle engaged all year because now they're like, well, I want to build a competitive team because if I don't make playoffs, I want to win the consolation bracket. Even if I don't have my own first, I can win that 113 pick. That's helpful. Maybe we don't do that forever, but maybe we do that for, 2 years to kind of softly rebalance the league and add some meaningful capital to the league without destabilizing it. And because they're untradeable picks, at least till after the rookie draft's over, the Sharks in the league can't exploit some of the teams that have that by trading for their future 113. It's only earnable during the playoffs, the consolation. The next one I think is the most important thing would be introducing some new blood. I think in every league you have managers who are actively engaged and some who aren't. And I'd say apathetic and inactive managers, especially those who aren't adding value to the league, or if anything, add detriment to the league if they're annoying or awkward or somehow just not good. They need to go because not only is their team's lack of direction a them problem, it's a whole league problem because that's a tough team to sell if it keeps getting worse when they had clearly obvious sell windows on certain players and they don't take advantage of it. Not saying everyone needs to trade, but when your team is 2-9 or 4-7 and you're looking and you cannot make playoffs, you should not still be sitting on a guy like AJ Brown. I mean, yes, sounds dumb because AJ Brown's a great player, but like your last chance to sell him for a first plus is right now, and you're still sitting on him, or like, I don't know, Dak Prescott in a super flex. It's not your last. And Matt Stafford, you're sitting on Matt Stafford right now in a super flex, and you're not in the playoffs, and you haven't traded him yet. That's a mismanagement of assets because he might be worth a late first or 2 seconds right now, and there's zero fucking chance he's worth that in the offseason. There's a non-zero chance he retires, and he's worth nothing, and that rebuilder got nothing out of him. So bringing in new blood does a plethora of things. One, the new manager is going to have less attachment to specific players. Like that manager may have said, "Oh, I drafted, Quentin Johnston or Zay Flowers, and I love that guy, and I know he's going to be a hit. I can't trade him yet." New manager comes in, goes, "I don't give a fuck. I'm getting rid of everybody." They have a different mindset. They have different players they like. They're probably more likely to make deals. They look at the team. They probably have some excitement around transforming their team, so they're going to start saying, "Hey, I know I have Bijan Robinson, but I don't care. Like I want to do this thing, and I'm going to trade Bijan to the highest bidder." And they're willing to create this influx of trade opportunities. And even like the Sharks might say, "Hey, this is an opportunity to exploit someone." And even if they can't, they're going to send out offers. It's going to stir up some trades. Another one I thought about was expanding lineups. I mentioned it multiple times, but these start 8 formats disproportionately also, even though it adds randomness, it also disproportionately benefits super teams because having a few elite players makes them almost unstoppable on top of suppressing the trade market. Because elite players make up a larger chunk of the roster, or the starting lineup, teams don't feel the incentive to trade their seconds for Jacoby Myers, even if he's good, because they'd say, I'd rather use my second to maybe get Rashee Rice, a 10% of Rashee Rice versus a 100% chance of Jacoby Myers. So you see this stale trade market. But if we were start 9 to start 10, all of a sudden the strategy around, I can start throwing Dalton Schultz in my flex when he's playing good. I can throw Zach Ertz in my flex more routinely. Guys like Calvin Ridley actually hit my lineup way more often. You see the trade market open up more because there's more startable players, which means there's more value to production than future production or prospective production. The last one is a roster purge. It's kind of in the same vein as a reset, but I thought of two different ones. One is we already do a 1-player roster cut in the summer before the auction draft. Maybe next year we cull 2 players or cull 3 players or cull 4 players from the bottom of our roster. It's not a lot of talent, but it's still going to be more exciting for the league in general. There's more players in the auction, and there's some chance for some turnover. The best managers in the league probably have the players number 21 through 25 in their roster are probably so much better than players 21 through 25 on your bottom feeders. If anything, those bottom feeders might not even have 25 players. The next one would be a controlled roster purge, which is very much like a reset, but it's kind of like a soft reset in terms of where you do a weighted protection idea where all of the teams are going to have to cut a chunk of their roster, including picks, where you say, based on a power ranking, the top team, the top quartile, they get to protect 20 of their assets, 25 of their assets, players, picks, whatever. The next quartile gets to protect 15. The next quartile gets to protect 10. Next quartile gets to protect 8. Whatever you want to call it. And what that does, and then you have a dispersal draft with auction fab dollars and whatever you want to have it. So it doesn't erase teams' identities, but it does inject some parity back in the league. And it's exciting, kind of like a redraft without necessarily completely hurting the top teams. Because then the teams at the top say, "Hey, I earned this roster. I deserve to keep a larger chunk of it." Anyways, I would say my final take on that is we're not dying. We're just at the natural stage. We're at a natural progression stage of a long-term dynasty league, and we should be celebrating the fact we made it 7 years and not work. I think if we, I think it's going to be a league that, we're going to talk to our grandkids about. Next question is from Matt Fantuzzi. He asks, in a tight end premium, he didn't send a voice note in a tight end premium, how should we balance out the scoring boost with historically slow breakout timeline for tight ends? Are we overcorrecting by pushing tight ends up the board? First thing I'd say is that we as a dynasty community, or just what I've seen online, we've become so much more impatient with player development than we should be. I remember as a kid looking, seeing, we drafted such and such a player, like can't wait, hopefully they hit, they hit someday, but QBs get benched in real life, coaches get fired instantly, running backs get cycled through as soon as they fail a blocking assignment, wide receivers get judged by week 6 and taken out of certain play calls. It's just like, and us as a dynasty community say, hey, this player didn't hit already, sell them for a second before it's too late. And it's like, what are you talking about? Tight ends, as you've probably heard, take the longest to develop because it's not just you don't just have to learn how to pass catch. There's blocking assignments for pass blocking, run blocking, running routes from the slot, running routes from in line with your hand on the ground, running routes from out wide, and then play action routes are so much more complicated because you still have to sell the run as a blocker before going out to run your route. Unlike a receiver who kind of just runs his route or runs his blocking assignment half-assed anyways half the time. What I'd say is that there is some validity to giving up on tight ends early that have zero breakout indicators, but I don't think we should still overcorrect. Like, breakouts still happen. Look at guys like, Evan Ingram, I guess Trey McBride still broke out in year 2, but like Tucker Kraft didn't break out till year 2 or year 3. Like you're seeing a lot of these. I think Mark Andrews took 3 years. Kelsey took a year. Like for a while, I guess Gronk, someone I think of it, I smashed right away, but he might have been hurt. I don't even remember, but like, there's no perfect model for this. And if there was, someone would already be a millionaire. And when I'm talking about investing in rookie tight ends, I prioritize pedigree, athleticism, and their intended offensive role, not just draft capital. Like I would draft players and I would buy players that were drafted to be weapons, guys who are athletic freaks, who are either super productive in college or have the athletic profile to be superstars, who also fell into landing spots where they could emerge as a top 2 target within the next 3 years. I'm not looking at right now. Like specifically a guy like Terrence Ferguson. He's on a crowded tight end room with 2 stud receivers. One might say, why would I invest in Terrence Ferguson? I would say, yes, of course I'm not going to invest a second in him. But if I can get him for a third or a pair of fourths, he's a type of player who has the athletic profile to become a superstar. Looking around at some of the guys like Theo Johnson, Elijah Arroyo, Harold Fannin, if he wasn't breaking out, would be one. Oronde Gadsden was one that I picked him up in several leagues thinking maybe in a couple years' time when Keenan Allen leaves and QJ leaves on his next contract, maybe Gadsden can move into that big. He's already smashing. Darnell Washington is another one. He was a freak at Georgia. Isaiah Likely is one. Ben Sinnott. I'm avoiding early tight ends who were drafted who were not pass catching threats in college, like your Luke Schoonmaker, like Tip Ryman. I'm going for athletic, high pedigree tight ends who are worth waiting for. Brenton Strange was one worth waiting for. I think Isaiah Likely is another one. I think how rookie tight ends are valued should depend on how strong the premium actually is. Because I think people overcorrect for tight end premium on super light premiums. Like I think a half point PPR with a half point tight end premium, there's almost no difference because they're still so touchdown dependent and touchdowns matter so much more than catches in that format that I still don't give a shit about a tight end in that format. You get to a heavy tight end premium like 1.75 or 2.0 tight end premium, volume is arguably the most important thing for a tight end. So I will take your Dalton Schultz type on a shitty offense over Mark Andrews 100 times out of 100 because Dalton Schultz is going to be getting 6 to 7 catches on any given week, and that's worth 2 touchdowns versus Mark Andrews, who's at this point in his career, he's a 1 to 4 catch guy, and you hope for a touchdown. Anyways, I don't chase capital unless their profile matches the production. Like, draft capital doesn't matter to me unless that profile matters a lot. Like if when Kyle Pitts was drafted, Brock Bowers, Ty Warren, those guys were all freak athletes in college, and they were drafted seemingly into a specific role that was gaping hole on those teams, and it immediately became the number 1 or number 2 pass catcher on those teams. Whereas I'm not chasing, if Dalton Kincaid is a unique one because he was undersized, but all right, let's move on to the next question. Co-host Dave, and I know this is getting long-winded, so I'm going to try to rip through these. But yeah, Dave, thanks for calling in.
How is the best way to navigate a league where the league doesn't seem to want to make trades, or a league where the trade values are quite askew, where certain teams value players quite significantly than what normal market is? What's the best way to navigate either rebuilding, acquiring assets, or doing anything from a trade perspective in those types of leagues? Should you just take the value when you have value? Do you just have to pay the cost that the cost is? Do you need to be pretty upfront about the trades you're about to be making so that you can actually see if anyone is willing to pay more for certain assets?
Dave, awesome question. It's very similar to some of the other questions we've already had. So his question was, how do you navigate a low trade or a closed economy in your league, a league that seems too risk averse or scared to make trades? And I'd say, understand that our league's trade volume is normal. I did some research. We've had 31 trades. My other leagues that are a little bit less mature, I have 32 trades, 40 trades, 45 trades. And then my startup league has 91 trades. That makes sense because during the startup draft, we had like 60 trades alone. Understand that, most trades happen around specific events, whether it's the startup draft, the rookie draft, or milestone events like midseason injuries, preseason injuries, trades in real life, free agent signings. And that's where trade commotion tends to happen most frequently. And then obviously the trade deadline. I don't want to repeat all the same stuff I'd said, but, choosing your direction earlier in season, I think is more helpful. The middle is the worst place to be. And I think, to me, I've heard this on a bunch of podcasts, like, well, wait to sell your first till you're a contender. And I think that's such a bad fucking philosophy. Because if you wait until you're a contender if you wait until you're a contender to make a trade, you may have lost out an opportunity to win a few games that would have made you a contender in the first place. Does that make sense? And if you're waiting to rebuild, you might lose out on the chance to be the first one to start rebuilding. So you are accumulating points for that are hurting your draft pick, and you're losing out on opportunities to buy low on depressed assets if you're still trying to cling to some weird contending window. Now, I'm not saying, sell at all costs and can, rebuild for 3 years, but anyways, you need to pick your direction and pick it early, in my opinion. And once you pick your direction, you need to understand that who are the real trade partners in your league. As your league matures, there's some variation of the following structure. You have a couple contenders that are fully built, no holes to fill. They have no need to trade for anything except maybe picks. You have a couple rebuilders who also don't have any use for points at all. So you can't sell that. You only have a few assets you could possibly sell them. That leaves about 4 to 6 teams in the middle who are your realistic trade partners. So you can't just send this blasted trade off to everyone and hope it works. You got to identify who can you trade with, and then who has a reason. How do my assets fit into their team? Kind of like I said earlier, just because you offer a team fair value does not mean that they have to accept the trade. If anything, that still doesn't mean a trade should make you feel uncomfortable when you say hit send. You shouldn't be like, this is an awesome trade. I can't wait. If they hit accept, I'm gonna be fucking thrilled. You probably sent a dog shit offer if that's how you feel. Once you're rebuilding, like we said earlier with Tony Pollard, you have to be okay with taking a value loss to achieve your long-term goal. Essentially pay a tax, but in the opposite direction. So even like some players in their prime, sometimes you should sell a good player at a loss to accomplish your long-term goal. Like if you sold Jonathan Taylor for just the 26 first right now, you'd be looked at as stupid. But what if that 26 first was like the 103 or 104, or it was your own first and you could make it the 101? 2 years from now in 2027, you're going to feel a lot better about that rookie you drafted with the 102 than you are going to feel about 29-year-old Jonathan Taylor or whatever, 28-year-old Jonathan Taylor. You could sell Jacobs for a first and second. Like it looks bad, but accomplishing your long-term goal to me is just more important than making sure you get adequate value. We talked about the start 8 kind of kills trade values because there's just one dominant strategy. If you have a top 2 or 3 tight end or quarterback, you're set, and everybody else feels like they're okay. Like, sorry, shots fired here, but everybody else feels quote unquote good enough at tight end because the difference between a guy like Njoku and a perceived better tight end like Ferguson or Kraft can be rationalized away. You go, well, Njoku just needs a better QB, and he's puts up kind of more or less the same points as Ferguson or Kraft, and it's like, okay, more or less, the answer is less, and that those few points over the course of the season could be the difference between a couple wins. So, in this format, depth isn't quite as valuable as studs are. And like second round rookies, wide receiver 4s, RB4s, they rarely crack lineups for contenders. So I think that's one thing that we could revisit to increase trade activity would be expanding roster lineup size. Because I talked about accepting a league tax or overpaying when you want to go buy a player that you want. Have conviction. Like if you really want, especially in this format, if you really want Rashee Rice, you got to pay 3 first. You can't be like, oh, well, his market value is like a first and a second or a first and 2 seconds. I'll give you 2 seconds. No, give 2 firsts and I don't know, Matthew Golden, 2 firsts and Cam Scadaboo if you want to go get Rashee Rice. The other thing is like try to use the auto accept trade block if you want to stir up some trades. But the point is that you have to list a trade that you would auto accept that's below their value, because if you list their auto accept trade block value as their actual market value or higher than that, the answer is you obviously would have auto accepted that anyways. The point is to say, I'm willing to sell this player below their market value automatically to the first bidder. So if you think, for example, I'm just calling you out because you did it. You picked up Kimani Vidal like off waivers and you put him on trade block for 2 seconds. Like, well, no shit, that's an auto accept. That's 4 times his value. If you had put him on the trade block for a 4th, you might have gotten an offer right away and you could have accepted it. Like right now, I'm thinking of like a guy who owns Harold Fannin. He's probably worth an early early second or 2 seconds or a first right now in a 1.5 tight end premium. If you're really trying to just get out from him, you put him on the auto accept trade block for any second in 26 or 27. And then somebody comes and offers a trade and you accept right away. That shows that you're serious about the auto accept trade block, and it's going to create this sense of urgency the next time you do it. The next time you go up and you say, I'm putting, George Pickens on the block, first and a second, first person to send it to me, or just a single first, because that's probably below his market value right now. You say, I'm just trying to rebuild. I will sell George Pickens for a single first. And people will go, oh shit, like now your nuts are on the table. You've shown that you're willing to accept that you might get someone who doesn't realize they're sitting on an early first in 27 or 28 to send you their early first for Pickens straight up. And I'd say an early first might be worth more than Pickens. So it's like, using the auto accept trade block is a way to get some action, but you got to list players below their market value because obviously you're going to auto accept anybody at their market value as a rebuilder or above their market value. Anyways, let's move on to Dave's next question. He asked the second one.
When you're going to rebuild, how do you know how much to sell off versus to keep? And when you're doing that, what are you looking to keep? My assumption is you want to be keeping an elite QB who's young, less than 27. You probably want to keep also some elite wide receivers that are young. But wide receivers tend to be easier to come by than running backs. And are you trying to keep some stud wide receivers and keep other, one-off pieces, tight ends, QBs, that they're young and valuable? Or are you trying to leverage those into multi-pick scenarios? The challenge, I think, that in evaluating skills is it doesn't really make sense for a good young player to be swapped simply for one first, because your best case scenario is you redraft a slightly better version of that same person as a first. Yes, they'll be 2 years younger, but you're not getting much on it rather than just keeping the asset you have. And so how do you navigate that to make sure that you're getting 2 for 1, even if it's a first and a third or a first and a second, to give you the flexibility to try to acquire, 2 potential players that are going to be outperforming on your team to help build your dynasty team back up to what best performance is?
Dave, good questions. He asked, when you're rebuilding, how do you decide what to keep versus what to sell and what type of return you're looking for? And he mentioned some examples. And I'd say, Dave, you're spot on. And you've touched on a few things that we've talked about already. And I think first and foremost, I would say, yes, when you're trading a young stud or productive player 25 years or younger, it's not enough to re-roll him for a single first. You're right. A single random first. That is the most important thing, because that touches on another subject, is that not all firsts are created equal. If I offer you a first for, I think of a player. I don't know. My brain's drawing a fucking blank right now. For Zay Flowers, I offer you a single first, and you go, I just spent the 108 on Zay Flowers. Why would I take a single first? But it's the 101. Like you saying, "Oh, I offered you a single first for him," and that you offered me a single first. That's not enough. I'm like, that's crazy. I offer you the pick that looks like it's the 101 to 103. Like you're just being intentionally dim. Like that pick is worth so much more than just a first. Even though it's one player, the hit rate on that player says it's worth more. Now, I would say any player who's 25 or younger in a top 12 at their position or top 3 at quarterback or tight end, or maybe not quarterback in one QB, but tight end and top 12, top 8 to 10 at running back, wide receiver, I would say they're probably worth 2 firsts minimum, or a first and a good plus. And then any of the elite elites, like, your Puka, JSN, Chase, Neighbors, actually, not hurt Neighbors, but like, Bijan, Rashee Rice, Gibbs, Brock Bowers, they're all worth 2 first plus, maybe even 3, or even more than that in one QB. I'd say some of those arguably are worth like 4 or 5 firsts, just like Josh Allen was worth 5 firsts in Superflex a couple years ago, maybe even still is. So I think an important differentiation here is to establish whether you're going for a reload or a rebuild. And how I like to define that is that a reload is, I'm missing it playoffs this year, but I'm going to come back next year with a vengeance. So you keep your core together. You keep youthful pieces like your aforementioned Gibbs, Bijan, Chris Olave, whatever. But you sell anything that's not going to help you next year or holds very fragile value. So if you are sitting on Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, Cortland Sutton, Calvin Ridley, Ridley's a bad example now, but like even Derrick Henry, like you're selling those guys almost at all costs, because your goal is to get rid of all your short-term landmines and hold together your the chassis of a contending roster and be ready to turn around next year. Because maybe you're just a few bad bounces, a few bad a few bad injuries, unlucky injuries away from contending. Full rebuild, I've already talked about this. I'm not going to go, but in a full rebuild, I'd say nobody should be untouchable, especially if it's at least max points 4. I'm willing to sell Bijan, Gibbs, Lamb, Puka, JSN. All of them can go, because it does not matter. It doesn't matter. A full rebuild, none of these players matter to my horizon because I'm not looking at contending until the soonest. If I decide right now to go to a rebuild, I'm not contending next year. I'm probably not contending in 27. So 2028 is the soonest I'm contending or trying to be competitive. And that means Bijan's 26, Gibbs is 25, 26, like London's 27, Rashee Rice is 28. Like those guys are no longer valuable assets. They're good. They're going to be great for a while. But look at AJ Brown. He went from 2 years ago was one of the top, most highly regarded top 3 dynasty wide receiver to being top 20, number 24. Like he's next to somebody like Ricky Pearsall at some points where you're just like, you hope to get a first for him when he's struggling. And so like, if you're fully rebuilding, nobody's untouchable. I don't care what position it is, but your goal should be to maximize picks because those can't get hurt, remove all injury risk from your assets, and build towards 27 and 28. And I like to build from the middle out. So like you said, getting QB first in a super flex, yes. One QB, I don't really care. You can find guys like Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Jordan Love. All those guys are barely worth seconds, in my opinion, in that form. And in a one QB, the difference between all those, it's one big flat tier. Brock Purdy, Bo Nix, in my opinion, Caleb, like they're all anywhere from a early second to a bunch of thirds, and like because they're QB3 on some teams. Like who fucking cares? How do you sell without losing long-term value? And I think the best tactic for me is a tear down, where like kind of we talked about earlier is I'm taking some of my stud, like a guy like CeeDee Lamb, and I'm trying to sell him for neighbors plus a first. Now I know that some of you owners out there are probably cringing at that concept. Like, why would I sell who I think is a wide receiver 2 in Dynasty for a good 20? Shut the fuck up. Dude, he hasn't scored points all year. If you had made that trade in week 3 and you were a contender, you'd be smashing right now, or whatever, week 5. No dynasty owner who owns Lamb, it would have swapped him straight up for neighbors when the injury happened, unless they were a rebuilder, in which case they probably would have tried to sell Lamb before that. But it just doesn't make any sense. No top 10 young dynasty receivers performing right now could be sold straight up right now for neighbors because it's maybe Pickens because he doesn't have the pedigree, but you're not getting Rice, JSN, Puka, London, Amon-Ra straight up for neighbors. And if you are, like, I'm sorry, point me in that direction. If I had a neighbor's share, I would tell him to, because it just doesn't make sense. He's probably not going to come back right away. I mean, he got hurt. I guess he could come back first thing next year, but I don't know. I'm just so hesitant to bet on players coming back from injuries. I know we just saw it with Stephon Diggs and Rashee Rice, and players are modern medicine's getting better, but like some other options here would be, find a depressed asset, not just an injured asset. Go trade Nico Collins for Brian Thomas in a first, or go trade Jonathan Taylor when he was smashing for Amari and Hampton in a first. Like these are all deals. Like to me, these are logical no brainers if you were trying to rebuild, or vice versa. If you were trying to contend and you had these injuries happen, you could have made some of these deals to try to fill in gaps on your team. The main principle for me when rebuilding is every rebuilding trade should be increasing your future flexibility and fungibility while also trying to align and marry your assets to your competitive window. So, like, to me, the ideal blueprint is to work from the middle out. Like I said, get your QB first in Superflex and TE anchored if you're tight end anchored. If you have, options to do that, if you think you can get your hands on a Tucker Kraft right now as a rebuilder, you absolutely fucking should. Because I think he's a stud top 5 tight end. And as soon as startups happen, he's going to be going right next to Tyler Warren during startup season. Then you start to stockpile young wide receivers. And then once you get close, that's when you either draft or trade for running backs to fill out your team. Because running back production tends to be more immediate and tangible. A running back doesn't need to get open to get opportunities. They just need to get on the field. Wide receivers need to get on the field and earn their targets. Running backs, an injury happens, they're on the field. Or if they get drafted to a good situation, they're on the field, they're producing. Wow, this is so long. I'm so sorry, guys. All right, next question is from Chris. He asks about what kind of tools do I use to evaluate trades, and how do I know when to buy or sell? So I'm not going to talk about buying and selling anymore. We've talked about it enough, but the 2 tools I probably have looked at the most, or I just, again, have referenced the most, is probably Keep Trade Cut and Adecos. So Keep Trade Cut is a tool where it's like a crowdsourced market of player values. And I think, to me, I use it as a tool when I go to send an offer. I punch in the trade to make sure, am I being an asshole with this offer? Not necessarily to say like, oh, this is a fair deal you should accept. It's more to say, if they type this trade in, are they going to see this and go, what a dick? But at the same time, like, I don't give a shit in certain situations. Like kind of like what I just said with the Lamb for Neighbors in a first. Like I don't. Every trade calculator is going to tell you to take the neighbor side, and I'll tell you that there's zero chance I'm accepting Neighbors in a first for Lamb if I'm contending. It just doesn't make sense for me. Okay, oh, you could trade the first for another guy. I don't want to then take Lamb's 22 points per game production or whatever he's capable of, get Neighbors, and then go send a first for T. Higgins' 14 points per game and say, yeah, this was a good deal for a good process. I don't fucking care. Otherwise, I would need a first. I'm not saying Lamb for Neighbors in a second. And I'm probably not doing Lamb for Neighbors in a first right now. I'm not trading Puka for, Garrett Wilson in a first. What in what world? Like, oh yeah, you're getting value. I don't care. Why does that mean? I don't just want I want the points. So I think keep trade cut is good for a 1-to-1 sanity check to say, am I being a biased owner about my own roster, or does it make sense that I personally like, Bucky Irving more than Brees Hall? And if I go, because the Brees Hall owner may come to me and say, I'll give you Brees for Bucky in a first. And I go, hey, dude, no disrespect, but I think Bucky's better than Brees. And they're like, are you fucking crazy? I'll go, okay, let me go just check to make sure I'm not being crazy. And I'll look at keep trade cut and go, okay, I'm not being crazy. The market says they're in the same tier. So for me to prefer Bucky over Brees Hall is not crazy. Now, I definitely don't. I feel like if you use it to construct a trade, I think it's helpful for new players. But your trades, keep trade cut has no way of accounting for league size, lineup size, how many contenders there are, how many games you need, bye weeks, injuries, consolidating players, where picks fall, like all this stuff. It's to me, it's a crutch if you use it to make your trade final. It's only helpful to get as a data point. The next one I use is a Dacos. It's he used to scrape ADPs himself, and now he has a website called Dynasty Data Lab, which scrapes sleeper rookie drafts and startup drafts to give you real-time views of player ADP. And I also use that kind of like a keep trade cut to say, how are players trending in startups? How are actual dynasty managers reacting in the offseason to news, hype, injuries? And do I see any arbitrage opportunities? Does keep trade cut say this guy's worth more than this guy? And Adekos is saying this guy's going way higher. Like there's an opportunity for me to say, hey, this guy's climbing. And if this guy's not paying attention, I might be able to get a Rondé Gadsden kind of cheap right now. Again, this point I made earlier is when to decide to buy or sell players. I think, again, evaluate what I want to be as soon as possible in the season and commit to it, because waiting to see if you're a contender will probably cost you the chance to become one. So if I think I can contend, I've done my research, I've done my homework, my projections look good, the league's landscape looks good, I'm committing to the fact that I'm willing to pay a first now to go get someone like Brian Thomas, because I'm saying right now my first is ambiguous. It could be an early first. So that to that manager, that first is more valuable. And Brian Thomas maybe hasn't smashed yet. So I make that trade and I say, I'm committing to this to contend. Whereas if I wait till week 9 and now I'm 4-6, I'm not or whatever, wait till week 11, I'm 4-6, I'm no longer a contender. Or I am a contender and I go to send my first for Brian Thomas and they're like, well, I don't want the 111. I want more. So now the price, your first just lost value because you waited till you were a contender to compete. Have some conviction. But I understand people wanting to be, risk averse and wanting to wait, but that's costs you the chances at making good deals earlier in the season. And if Brian Thomas is smashing, he's probably worth 2 firsts now. So it's like there's chances to lose that trade too. If you made that same bet on Xavier Worthy, you'd be kicking yourself. But that's what I'd say when it comes to how to decide. We've got 2 questions left. They're very quick, so let's move on to King. One of the loyal followers. Here's his question.
Hey Sultan, say hi to your mom for me. Is Dak elite?
And for those of you who couldn't understand his ridiculous Australian accent, he asked is Dak elite, which is a running joke in Discord. I'd say Dak has elite production, but not an elite horizon. So be willing to pay a first plus in Superflex. Probably wouldn't pay much for him in 1 QB because everybody has pretty I think there's not that much of a difference between Goff and Dak in 1 QB. So why would I pay a first or a second for Dak when I have Goff? Which is why I think quarterbacks have no value in 1 QB. And the last question is from Wex.
What's up, Joe and Dave? Longtime listener, first time caller. My question for y'all is, what is your favorite holiday side dish? Happy holidays, guys.
Wex, thanks for calling in. One of the better listeners, league mates. What's your favorite Thanksgiving side? Airing this episode a little later than I wanted to, but I'd say my favorite side is the turkey because everyone knows the main course at Thanksgiving is the side dishes. No, I mean, obviously, I guess that's actually probably some truth to that. But no, I'd say I guess my favorites are stuffing and mac and cheese. But the stuffing has to be like just the breading and maybe some meat in it if you do some like stuff sausage. But like I don't want stuffing that has like caramelized peppers and onions and anything that's like get that gross texture out of there. And the mac and cheese, you just really can't fuck up mac and cheese. It's so good. But anyways, guys, I'm so glad to be back. This is such a long episode, but so much to catch up on. You know, it's week 13. Week 13 just concluded. Week 14 is coming up next week. So many storylines across all my leagues. Thankfully, I've secured the bye in like all of them. So it's way less stressful on me this week. But I know so many leagues are being decided. Where so many playoff spots, so many playoff hopes and dreams are about to be crushed. Hopefully next week we'll be talking about, playoff matchups and, how everyone's done so far this season and maybe some players to target in the offseason. Anyways, peace out. Love you.